The wind over Krakow that morning carried with it the sound of boots, heavy, synchronized, and hollow against the cobblestones. Snow fell in thin, nervous streaks, coating the gray streets with a deceptive calm. Beneath that fragile layer of white lay the soot and ash of 1,000 lives erased, lives that had names, laughter, and families, now reduced to numbers. The banners of the Reich fluttered above the garrison walls, their red fabric slapping sharply in the cold air like the echo of gunfire. Major Otto Weber adjusted the leather strap of his field cap as he stepped out from his quarters. He was a man of precision, uniform crisp, metals polished, boots spotless even in the mud. But beneath that perfect exterior, something unsettled lingered in his eyes, a flicker that didn't belong in the face of a man who'd sworn loyalty to the Führer. Otto had served on the Eastern Front, seen the brutality, and watched men become beasts under the guise of discipline. Yet, somehow, he still managed to feel something. A dangerous thing in times like these. His assignment was routine, at least on paper. Operation Winter Veil, they called it, the quiet relocation of Jewish families from the outskirts to the new labor compound. In reality, Otto knew what that meant. No one came back from these relocations. They were final departures. The orders came sealed and stamped with the Black Eagle, and though the paperwork was clean, the meaning was drenched in blood. As he rode in the back of the truck with his squad, the frost on the window blurred the landscape, gray trees, white roads, black smoke. He watched in silence. His men, younger and more zealous, laughed about card games and rations. None of them asked where they were going, or who they were collecting. For them, duty was blind obedience. For Otto, duty had begun to rot from within. The convoy stopped outside a broken farmhouse on the edge of the ghetto. The village was silent, too silent. Even the dogs had learned not to bark. Otto stepped down, his boots crunching over ice and old straw. He scanned the horizon, a line of skeletal houses, each one shuttered tight. The air smelled of burning wood and something else, something metallic, faint, like rust or dried blood. He didn't have to knock. When the soldiers kicked open the door, the scene inside was always the same. But this time, it wasn't. Inside, amid the overturned furniture and silence, he saw her, a small girl, no older than 6, sitting beside a bed with a threadbare doll clutched to her chest. Her eyes were too large for her face, and her lips trembled not from cold, but from terror. A woman, her mother, he assumed, lay motionless beside her, a thin blanket pulled up to her chin. Otto didn't need to check, he could tell she was gone. The child didn't scream. She just stared at him, her doll's porcelain face pressed against her cheek as if it could protect her from the world collapsing around her. His men moved in automatically. "Sir, orders say to clear the property." "We should take the girl," one of them barked, rifle already raised slightly, impatient, eager to finish the task. Otto didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the child, at the tear that slid down her dirt-streaked cheek, freezing before it could fall. She couldn't have understood what was happening. She didn't even move when one of the soldiers reached for her arm. "Wait," Otto said quietly. His voice cut through the room like the edge of a blade. The soldiers froze, surprised. He walked forward, knelt beside the girl, and for a moment, their eyes met. In that instant, he saw something that shouldn't have existed, trust. She didn't know him, didn't know his uniform, didn't know the insignia that represented death. But she looked at him the way a child looks at anyone who might offer safety. "What's your name?" he asked softly, though he knew she wouldn't answer. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Leah." It hit him harder than a bullet. A name. Not a number. Not a classification. Just a name, simple, human, pure. And somehow, in that frozen moment, Otto felt something shift deep inside him. The machine of war paused for a single heartbeat. "Sir?" The soldier beside him sounded uneasy. "Orders?" Otto straightened, his jaw tightening. "The child comes with us. She'll be processed at command." His tone left no room for argument. The soldier hesitated but nodded. The others went back to searching the house, while Otto helped Leah stand. Her hand was tiny, cold, fragile, like holding a bird. She didn't resist, but she didn't let go either. As they loaded the truck, Otto felt the familiar pull of conflict inside him. Every instinct screamed to follow procedure, to obey, to stay invisible. Yet every moral fiber in him, what little remained, told him this child's fate shouldn't end in a camp. Not her. Not like this. He had seen too many die already. When they arrived back at the garrison that night, Otto signed the papers himself. Under transport record, he wrote, "Civilian orphan, unfit for labor. To be reassigned." He knew that one false word could mean death, but he didn't care. Something about Leah's eyes wouldn't let him. Later, in his quarters, he sat at his desk, staring at her file. He had done something reckless, treasonous, even. A Nazi officer falsifying records for a Jewish child. It was unthinkable. If the Gestapo found out, there would be no trial, no mercy. Yet as the snowstorm howled outside, Otto felt calm. Leah was safe for now, sleeping in a storage room near the barracks kitchen, wrapped in a wool blanket. He'd told the guards she was the daughter of a German civilian, displaced by the war. None questioned him, not yet. But deep down, Otto knew the illusion wouldn't last long. The next morning, he found her sitting quietly by the window, watching the snow fall. When she noticed him, she smiled, a small, hesitant thing, but real. It was the first genuine smile he had seen in years. And that was the moment he realized something terrible. To save her, he would have to become the enemy of everything he'd ever sworn to serve. The morning after Otto falsified Leah's records, a pale sun crept reluctantly over the barracks, casting long shadows that sliced through the frost. Every sound, the clang of metal, the distant barking of orders, the rhythmic stamp of boots, seemed sharper, more dangerous than before. Otto knew that beneath the order and discipline of the German garrison, eyes were everywhere. Suspicion was a currency, and silence was often bought with blood. Leah sat by the stove in the kitchen storeroom, her small fingers wrapped around a tin cup of watery soup. The kitchen maid, a quiet woman named Marta, had given it to her without asking questions. Marta had seen enough to know that sometimes the less you said, the longer you lived. Otto stood by the doorway, watching. He could see her ribs through the fabric of her too large coat, the way her hands trembled slightly even as she tried to eat. She looked up at him once, that same strange, trusting look, and for a moment, he almost smiled. But there was no safety in sentiment. Otto's world was one where kindness was treason. Later that day, as he walked through the administrative wing, he caught fragments of a conversation between two officers, Hauptmann Kruger and Lieutenant Vogel, men who lived for regulations and the fear they instilled. "Heard there's an unregistered civilian in the West Wing." "Some child," Kruger muttered, his voice low but sharp. "The Oberst won't like that. Every mouth must be accounted for." "Maybe it's one of Weber's cases," Vogel replied. "He's got a reputation for taking liberties. You know how he gets." Kruger's smirk was cold. "Too much sympathy, that one. Dangerous habit." Otto walked past them without breaking stride, but his stomach tightened. He knew what that meant. One rumor, one curious look, and Leah would vanish, and so would he. That night, when the garrison slept and the corridors fell silent except for the faint hum of the generators, Otto returned to the storeroom. Leah was asleep on a pile of old burlap sacks, her doll resting beside her. For a long moment, he simply stood there, watching her chest rise and fall. It was a fragile rhythm, like the ticking of a clock in a house where time had stopped caring. He knew she couldn't stay there. The risk was too high. So, under the dim light of his lantern, Otto made a decision that would seal his fate. He would hide her in the one place no one dared to search, the abandoned officers' quarters beneath the old East Wing. The East Wing had been bombed months earlier and was now officially condemned, unstable, cold, a graveyard of stone and dust. But Otto remembered something from the blueprints, a narrow maintenance crawlspace behind the walls, leading to a forgotten storage room sealed after the collapse. If he could clear a way through, Leah could stay there, unseen, unheard, a ghost within the heart of the Reich itself. At dawn, before the others stirred, Otto returned with tools and an old blanket. He whispered to Leah, waking her gently. "We're going for a walk, little one. You must be very quiet, do you understand?" She nodded, eyes wide, fear and trust warring in them. Otto wrapped her in his overcoat and carried her through the corridor, avoiding the main hallways. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like thunder in his ears. Twice, he had to stop and wait as patrols passed, his heart pounding like a drum. The scent of oil and cold iron filled the air. Leah buried her face against his chest, and he could feel her tiny heartbeat, fast, but steady. When they finally reached the sealed doorway of the east wing, Otto pried open the warped wood and stepped into darkness. The air was damp and heavy with dust. Broken furniture lay scattered like skeletons of another life. The only light came from his lantern, its flame trembling in the cold air. He led her through the debris until they reached the hidden maintenance passage. The crawlspace was narrow, the kind that forced even Otto to stoop low. He cleared the cobwebs and old bricks with his gloved hands until the passage opened into a small, low-ceilinged room. Inside were remnants of a different time, cracked porcelain, a rusted lamp, and an old desk half buried under plaster. It smelled of stone and memory. "This will be your room," he whispered, setting her down. "You mustn't leave unless I come for you. Do you understand?" Leah nodded silently, clutching her doll tighter. Otto placed a small box of rations and a flask of water beside her. "I'll bring you food, every night. If anyone asks, you don't exist. You're my secret, Leah." For a moment, she reached out and touched his sleeve. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. Otto froze. It was a question he had asked himself countless times since that morning. Why? Because he had a daughter once? Because he'd grown tired of watching children vanish? Because, deep down, he no longer believed in the cause he served? "I don't know," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe because someone should." That night, as he walked back to his quarters, the full weight of what he'd done began to settle in. He had crossed a line, not just against his superiors, but against the very structure that defined his life. There was no going back now. Over the next few days, Otto maintained his routine with mechanical precision. He signed reports, gave orders, attended meetings, all while secretly bringing food and supplies to Leah in the dead of night. Each visit was a risk, but it became his only reason to breathe. The small hidden room had become a sanctuary, a place untouched by hate, where silence was not fear, but peace. But peace is a fragile thing. One evening, as Otto returned from an inspection, he found a letter on his desk marked with the seal of the Gestapo. His pulse quickened. The letter was short and cold. "Major Weber, reports indicate irregularities in your last transport logs. You are to present all documentation for verification within 48 hours. Any discrepancies will be considered an act of treason against the Reich." Otto stared at the words until they blurred. His false entry for Leah had been noticed. Somewhere, a number hadn't matched. The system, merciless, perfect in its cruelty, was closing in. That night, when he brought Leah her food, he could barely keep his composure. She sensed something wrong and tugged at his hand. "Are we in trouble?" she asked, her small voice echoing in the dark. Otto knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not yet," he whispered. "But we have to be careful. Very careful." She tilted her head. "You look sad." He forced a smile. "I'm just tired." But inside, Otto knew what it meant. He had to make a choice. He could destroy the records, disappear the evidence, or run. But running meant abandoning everything. Staying meant death for them both. Outside, the snow began to fall again, thicker this time. It covered the camp like a burial shroud. Otto looked out through the broken window, his reflection barely visible in the frost, and whispered to himself words he hadn't spoken in years, words of prayer, long forbidden. Because now, for the first time since the war began, Otto Weber wasn't sure if he was a soldier anymore. He was something else, a man standing at the edge of damnation, holding the fragile thread of a child's life in his trembling hands. and the walls were closing in. The Gestapo didn't arrive with sirens or shouting, they came like a slow disease. Quiet, methodical, inevitable. Within days of the letter's arrival, Otto could feel their presence in the air. The mood in the garrison changed, laughter disappeared, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and eyes began to linger too long. Even the guards who once greeted him with stiff salutes now avoided his gaze, uncertain whether he would be the next to vanish. Otto had seen the Gestapo work before. He'd watched officers reduced to trembling wrecks after a single interrogation. It never mattered whether one was guilty or innocent, only whether one was useful. And Otto, he feared, was neither anymore. He spent the following morning buried in paperwork, cross-checking every report, every transfer log, every falsified name. The numbers didn't lie, but they could be made to blur. He carefully replaced one record after another, shifting figures so that Leah's existence was buried beneath layers of bureaucracy. It was dangerous work, one wrong entry, and the entire deception would unravel. Still, he persisted. By noon, the garrison doors opened, and a black car pulled into the courtyard, the kind no one wanted to see. Two men stepped out, wearing gray overcoats and blank expressions. Their eyes were as cold as the metal badges pinned to their lapels. The officer in front introduced himself with a curt nod. Major Weber. I'm Oberinspector Reinhardt, Gestapo Division 7. We've come to review your recent operations. Otto's throat tightened, but he maintained his composure. Of course, Oberinspector. My records are ready for inspection. Reinhardt smiled faintly, a smile with no warmth in it. Good. I appreciate officers who cooperate. The inspection began immediately. For 2 hours, the Gestapo men sifted through papers, asking quiet, pointed questions. Otto answered them with the practiced calm of a man used to lying for survival. Every syllable had to be measured, every glance carefully controlled. But beneath his controlled exterior, sweat collected on his palms. Then, Reinhardt asked the question Otto dreaded. This entry here, civilian child, Leah Braun. I can't find her transfer order or her clearance mark. Where is she? The words hung in the air like a noose. Otto leaned forward, forcing himself to look unconcerned. She was a civilian orphan from the Eastern Territories, he said smoothly. Sickly. Deemed unfit for relocation. I sent her to the infirmary for medical evaluation. Likely dead by now. Reinhardt stared at him for a moment too long. His eyes, sharp and colorless, seemed to look through Otto rather than at him. Very well, he said finally, scribbling a note in his ledger. But I will require confirmation from the infirmary. You understand procedure. Otto inclined his head. Of course. That night, he could barely breathe. He paced his quarters, the ticking of the clock sounding louder than his heartbeat. Every second that passed brought Reinhardt closer to the truth. There was only one way out now. He had to make Leah disappear again, this time for real. Near midnight, Otto crept into the east wing carrying a small satchel. Leah was awake, sitting in the dim glow of his lantern. She had drawn something on the cracked wall, a house, a sun, and 2 figures holding hands. When she saw him, she smiled faintly. You came back. I always come back, he said softly, though he wasn't sure how much longer that would be true. He crouched beside her and took her hand. Leah, listen to me. Tomorrow, men will come here asking questions. If they find you, they'll take you away. Do you understand? Her small brow furrowed. Where will they take me? Otto hesitated. There were no words gentle enough for the truth. Someplace far away. A place you can't come back from. Her fingers tightened around his. I don't want to go there. He felt something in his chest crack, a soundless, invisible breaking. You won't, he promised. But we must move again. Tonight. Leah nodded bravely, though her lip trembled. Otto wrapped her in his coat and led her through the maintenance tunnels, careful to avoid every patrol route. The corridors were darker now, colder, as if the building itself knew what was happening. Once, they had to duck behind a stack of crates as a guard passed by, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the dark. Otto could feel Leah trembling against him. He whispered, quiet as a mouse, and she pressed her face against his chest, her breath shallow and fast. They finally emerged in the old stables beyond the main compound, abandoned since the winter. It was cold, damp, but safer. He laid out a blanket, gave her some bread, and lit a small oil lamp. The light painted her face in soft gold, making her seem almost unreal in this place of gray and stone. She looked up at him with wide eyes. Why do they hate us? Otto froze. He had spent years enforcing policies, orders, and commands, all built on that hatred. And yet, confronted by a child's simple question, he found himself unable to speak. Because they've forgotten how to see, he said finally. They don't see people anymore. Only lies. Leah nodded, though she couldn't understand the full weight of his words. But you see, she said simply. You're not like them. He looked away, ashamed. Don't say that, he muttered. I've done terrible things. She reached out, placing her tiny hand over his gloved one. Then maybe this is your good thing. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, the wind, the war, the noise. All that remained was the warmth of a child's forgiveness in the coldest place on earth. But outside, danger was growing. The next morning, Otto received a report that made his blood run cold. The infirmary had been searched, no record of Leah Braun existed. Reinhardt now had proof that Otto had falsified the file. He would come again, and this time, he would not ask politely. Otto had no choice. He began preparing for the unthinkable, an escape. He mapped out a route through the forest beyond the garrison, leading to a network of abandoned supply tunnels used during the early years of the occupation. If they could reach the river, there was a chance to cross into neutral territory. It was madness, but it was the only way. That night, he visited Leah one last time before the escape. She was asleep, clutching her doll beneath the flickering lamp. Otto stood there, watching, memories flooding his mind, of his own daughter, Anna, who had died of fever before the war. Perhaps that was why he couldn't let Leah go. Perhaps saving her was the only way to silence the ghosts that haunted him. He whispered into the darkness, I'll get you out. I swear it. But as he turned to leave, he saw movement through the cracks in the stable door, a shadow, quick and deliberate. Then, a voice. Major Weber, Reinhardt's calm tone drifted in, followed by the sound of boots crunching on gravel. Working late, are we? Otto's blood turned to ice. He extinguished the lamp and pressed a finger to Leah's lips. Not a sound, he breathed. Her eyes widened with fear, but she didn't move. Reinhardt's silhouette passed by the doorway, pausing for just a second too long. Then came the sound of footsteps receding into the night. Otto didn't exhale until the silence returned. But he knew it now, there would be no more time for plans. The Gestapo would come at dawn. And by then, either they would both be gone. Or they would both be dead. The dawn crept upon the garrison like a thief, silent but deadly. A pale gray light filtered through the snow clouds, casting long, thin shadows across the courtyard. Otto had not slept. Every minute of the night had been spent listening, for footsteps, for whispers, for the metallic click of a rifle bolt being drawn somewhere in the dark. When the first sliver of light appeared on the horizon, he knew it was time. Leah stirred quietly under his coat, rubbing her eyes. Is it morning? She whispered, her voice small and innocent. Yes, Otto said softly, glancing toward the gate. And we must leave before the morning finds us. He strapped the satchel to his shoulder. It contained forged papers, a small revolver, and 2 days' worth of rations. He'd stolen them from the supply room hours earlier, careful not to raise suspicion. But he knew that by now, Reinhardt's men would be closing in. Somewhere in the garrison, a report had already been filed. A name. A suspicion. A trail leading straight to him. Otto lifted Leah into his arms, wrapped tightly in a wool blanket, and slipped into the tunnels beneath the east wing. The narrow passage smelled of rust and damp stone. It had been built long before the war, a service corridor used for moving coal and water pipes. Now, it would be their only road to freedom. The echo of his boots seemed unbearably loud. Every step reminded him how thin the wall between life and death truly was. At one point, Leah coughed softly, and Otto froze. Above them, he heard muffled voices, guards patrolling the corridor. He pressed himself against the cold wall, heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" one of the guards asked. "Probably rats," the other replied. Otto didn't move until their voices faded. Then, taking a deep breath, he continued on. After nearly an hour, the tunnel ended in a rusted hatch that led out behind the garrison, near the edge of the woods. Otto forced it open, and a blast of icy air struck his face. The world outside was vast and white, snow-covered trees stretching endlessly into the mist. The forest looked like a graveyard of shadows, and every shadow could hide a gun, a patrol, or worse. He set Leah down gently. "From here, we stay quiet. Follow my steps exactly. Don't speak, no matter what happens. Understand?" Leah nodded bravely. Her small hand slipped into his, trembling but firm. They moved into the forest, each footstep muffled by fresh snow. The cold bit through Otto's uniform, but he ignored it. He had one thought only: distance. Every meter they put between themselves and the garrison was one heartbeat closer to life. Hours passed. The world grew stiller, quieter, and crueler. The snow deepened, and Leah began to tire. Otto carried her when he could, though his legs ached from exhaustion. His breath came in short, painful bursts. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. By midday, they reached the river, a dark ribbon of water half frozen beneath sheets of ice. The current moved sluggishly, thick with shards of drifting frost. Otto knew crossing it would be dangerous, but there was no choice. The Gestapo would soon discover their escape, and when they did, they would send dogs. The river would be their only way to lose the scent. He found a narrow point where the ice looked thick enough to hold their weight. Setting Leah down, he knelt beside her. "Listen carefully," he said. "We're going to cross the river. You must hold my hand and keep your eyes on me. Don't look down, don't stop walking. All right?" Leah's lips were blue from the cold, but she nodded. "I'll be brave," she said softly. Otto smiled faintly, a fragile, fleeting thing. "You already are." They stepped onto the ice. It creaked and groaned beneath their feet, protesting every movement. Otto moved slowly, testing each step before placing his full weight. Halfway across, the sound of distant barking shattered the silence. Dogs. Reinhardt's men were close. Otto tightened his grip on Leah's hand. "Go," he hissed. They moved faster, slipping and stumbling as the barking grew louder, followed by shouted orders in German. Then, a gunshot. The bullet struck the ice a few meters away, splintering it into cracks that spread like lightning. Otto lifted Leah into his arms and sprinted, ignoring the agony in his legs. Behind them, the ice gave way with a violent crack. They reached the far bank just as the ice collapsed completely. Cold water surged up, swallowing the hole they'd left behind. Otto scrambled up the slope, clutching Leah to his chest. He could hear the soldiers shouting across the river, but none dared to cross the broken ice. For now, they were safe. They collapsed under a fallen tree, gasping for breath. Leah was shivering uncontrollably. Otto stripped off his outer coat and wrapped it around her, rubbing her arms to keep the blood flowing. "Papa," she murmured weakly, the first time she'd called him that. The word pierced him deeper than any bullet could. He blinked back tears, brushing her hair from her forehead. "Rest now," he whispered. "Just a little longer, and we'll be free." But freedom, he knew, was still far away. They had to reach the old railway station near the border. 20 kilometers of frozen wilderness stood between them and safety. And Reinhardt, with his dogs and his men, would not stop. Night fell again, the forest now a maze of moonlight and mist. Otto trudged forward through the snow, his every step echoing with exhaustion. Leah slept fitfully in his arms, murmuring faintly in her dreams. The world was silent except for the distant howling of wolves and the crunch of his boots on the ice. Then, somewhere behind them, came a faint whistle, short, sharp, unmistakable. The signal of a patrol. Otto's heart sank. They had found his trail again. He moved faster, weaving between trees, trying to hide his footprints where he could. But the forest was endless, and he was running out of strength. The cold gnawed at his bones, and his vision blurred. For a moment, he stumbled, falling to his knees. Leah woke and clung to his neck, whispering, "Don't stop, Papa. Please." That one word, Papa, gave him strength. He forced himself up and pressed on. Finally, through the blur of snow and exhaustion, he saw it, the faint outline of the railway tracks, buried beneath ice. The station was close. If they could make it there, they might find an old supply train, perhaps even a chance to stow away. But before hope could bloom, a beam of light cut through the darkness, a flashlight. Then another. Voices. "Halt!" a soldier shouted. Otto turned, shielding Leah. He could see Reinhardt among them, his pistol raised, his face calm and pitiless. "Major Weber," Reinhardt called out. "It's over. You've disgraced your uniform enough. Hand over the girl." Otto's breath came out in clouds. He raised his pistol, the small revolver shaking in his frozen hand. "If you come any closer," he said hoarsely, "I'll shoot." Reinhardt smirked faintly. "You won't. You're too much of a coward to die for her." Otto said nothing. His finger trembled on the trigger, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Leah's small voice broke the silence. "Don't let them take me." Something hardened in Otto's eyes. "They won't." Then, the world exploded in chaos. Gunfire echoed through the trees. Snow burst into white plumes as bullets struck. Otto grabbed Leah and dove behind a fallen log. The air was filled with the sharp, metallic smell of gunpowder. He returned fire blindly, each shot louder than the last. Reinhardt's men fanned out, shouting orders. Otto knew he couldn't win. Not against 10 men. Not in this cold. But he could buy time. He turned to Leah, his voice breaking. "Run. Follow the tracks north until you see the bridge. Don't stop for anyone. Understand?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I don't want to leave you." "You must," he said, gripping her shoulders. "You must live, Leah. Promise me." She nodded through her tears. Otto forced a smile, the kind only a dying man could work, full of love and sorrow. "Go." Leah turned and ran into the storm, her small figure swallowed by the snow. Otto rose, firing until his gun clicked empty. Then, a shot struck him in the side. He fell, clutching his wound. Reinhardt approached slowly, his pistol trained on Otto. "You could have had everything, Major," he said coldly. "But you chose this. For a rat." Otto spat blood into the snow. "Not a rat," he whispered. "A child." Reinhardt raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Otto's final bullet struck him square in the chest. The inspector stumbled, eyes wide, then fell backward into the snow. Otto slumped against the log, the world fading to white. He thought of Leah, running, surviving. For the first time in years, he felt peace. The war, the uniforms, the guilt, all of it melted away. He looked up at the falling snow and smiled faintly. "Be free," he murmured. "For both of us." And then, the forest swallowed his last breath. The war ended, but its ghosts lingered. Europe was a graveyard of memories, burnt cities, nameless graves, and faces lost to time. The world moved on, rebuilding brick by brick, but the snow that had fallen over the forest that night never truly melted. Somewhere beneath it, the story of a man and a child lay buried, until, decades later, it was uncovered by accident. In 1978, a young historian named Elias Roth was cataloging war archives in Munich. The building smelled of dust and forgotten years, its walls lined with shelves of tattered documents. He had been searching for records of missing officers from the Wehrmacht, men who had vanished in the final years of the war. Most were deserters or casualties. But one file, thin and water-stained, caught his eye. It was labeled Weber, Otto, missing, Eastern Front, 1943. Inside were a few brittle pages, a disciplinary report from the Gestapo, a confiscated photograph, and a short note scribbled in pencil, suspected treason. Aiding a Jewish fugitive. Elias frowned. Something about it felt unfinished, like a story interrupted mid-sentence. He studied the photograph, a black and white image of a man in uniform, standing beside a small girl in a wool coat. The girl's face was turned upward, smiling faintly at the man. The man's expression was unreadable, half sorrow, half tenderness. On the back of the photo, faded handwriting read, "To Papa, from Leah." Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. Leah. The name stirred something deep inside him, a whisper of a memory from the countless testimonies he had read. But no record in the archives mentioned a Leah connected to Otto Weber. He decided to find out why. Over the next months, Elias traced every clue he could. He traveled from Munich to Berlin, from Berlin to Warsaw, following fragments, a burned letter here, a survivor's account there. Most leads led nowhere. Otto Weber, it seemed, had been erased. But then, in a Jewish refugee archive in Krakow, Elias stumbled upon a single letter written in shaky handwriting, dated 1947. It began. "To whomever finds this, my name is Leah Cohen. I survived the war because of a German officer. I never knew why he saved me, only that he called me by my name when everyone else called me Rat. He told me to run north until I found a bridge. I did. And I lived." The letter ended abruptly, signed simply Leah. Elias sat back, heart pounding. He compared the signature to the photograph, the same handwriting, the same name. Could it be the same child? He followed the next lead, a post-war orphan record from Poland. It listed a Leah Weber, adopted by a family in England in 1948. She had taken her rescuer's surname, not knowing his fate. Elias booked a flight to London. The English countryside was quiet that winter, much like the Bavarian one Otto once knew. Elias arrived at a modest house outside Oxford, where an elderly woman lived alone. Her name was Leah Stein, née Weber. She greeted him with a kind but wary smile, her eyes pale and distant, the way old souls often look when they've seen too much of the world. "I was told you wanted to speak about my past," she said softly, leading him to the sitting room. "Yes," Elias replied, carefully opening his folder. "I believe you were saved by a German officer during the war. I've been researching him, Major Otto Weber." At the mention of the name, Leah froze. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "So, you know his name?" Elias nodded. "Barely. His file was almost empty. The records were destroyed. But I found this." He handed her the photograph. Leah took it with shaking hands. The instant her eyes met the image, tears filled them. "I thought this was gone," she whispered. "They burned everything when they took us away." "How did you find it?" Elias hesitated. "In an old Gestapo file. It survived somehow. Maybe someone hid it." Leah stared at the picture for a long time. "He was kind," she said finally. "Different. I didn't understand it then. He was supposed to hate me, to hate what I was. But he didn't. He looked at me like I was still human." She placed the photo gently on the table, her voice trembling. "The night we escaped, he told me to run. I never saw him again. I always wondered if he made it." Elias swallowed. "He didn't," he said softly. "He was shot near the railway station. But before he died, he made sure you were free." Leah closed her eyes, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. "I always hoped he had lived," she murmured. "I wanted to thank him. I wanted to tell him I became a nurse, that I helped children who lost everything. That his mercy didn't die that night." The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. Elias watched her carefully, realizing that this moment of truth, was why history mattered. Because behind every statistic, behind every nameless grave, there was a heartbeat that once defied hate. After a while, Leah rose and walked to a small chest near the fireplace. She opened it and pulled out a small, tin box. Inside was a worn chess piece, a black king. "He used to keep this with him," she said, holding it out to Elias. "He told me it reminded him that every move has a cost, that in war, even the smallest act of kindness can topple empires." Elias took the piece reverently, feeling the weight of history in his palm. "He was right," he said quietly. Leah smiled faintly through her tears. "Yes." And he made his move. That night, as Elias sat in his hotel room, he placed the photograph and the chess piece on the table before him. The snow outside fell gently against the window, just as it had that night in 1943. He thought about Otto Weber, the man who had risked everything to save a single child, and about Leah, who had carried his memory across decades and continents. History would never remember them as heroes. There would be no statues, no medals. But somewhere between the pages of forgotten war reports and the silence of snowy forests, their story lived, a whisper against the roar of cruelty, a flicker of light in the darkest chapter of humanity. Elias closed his notebook and looked at the photograph one last time. Otto's eyes seemed to stare back at him through time, calm, resolute, almost alive. Beneath it, the faint words written by Leah echoed like a promise. "To Papa, from Leah." The historian smiled sadly and whispered to the empty room, "He'd be proud of you." Outside, the first light of morning touched the snow-covered streets. The world had changed, yet in that soft, quiet light, for one fleeting moment, it felt as though Otto and Leah were still walking together through the forest, hand in hand, defying the world once more.